Fire breaks out aboard a ship loaded with hazardous cargo. Docked in an area dense with oil refineries and industrial chemicals.
Here comes another explosion. The sky. You have just heard it. We are bending down. The sky is like broad daylight.
Something just like picked up the house and shook it. Just shook it and then put it back down.
A small Texas town left in ruins.
It was just pandemonium and everything was on fire that you can imagine.
It was just like a war, that's what it was. And I said, my goodness, what has happened?
I asked the Lord, if I can't get out, please let me die in peace and not lay here any longer.
The town of Texas City, Texas, was built on the back of its chemical industry. Plants and refineries dominate the waterfront. Raw materials taken from the earth are transformed into chemicals that are unknown in nature. These materials are amazingly versatile and are vital to society. But if recklessly handled, they can exact their terrifying revenge. In Texas City, they know this fact all too well. The mishandling of a dangerous chemical triggered their darkest day. An epic disaster unknown to many Americans, but forever ingrained in the minds of its survivors. 40 miles south of Houston, Texas City is one of the busiest ports in the nation, and its chemical industry is a major reason why. This industry has its roots in the Second World War. The military needed chemicals, and the town geared up to provide them. In the process, its population tripled, reaching nearly 18,000.
That's when the town changed so much, so fast. All the refineries that were here upgraded, became larger. New ones came in and joined them. People came in. There wasn't a bedroom that wasn't rented out. It was a time of tremendous growth.
Jobs in the chemical plants were plentiful, but the hours were long.
We were working 6 days a week. At that time, you couldn't buy a car. There were no houses available. It was really a very difficult time. But as young people, we still had a good time.
I worked in the laboratory at Monsanto. My sister worked there too and would be walking through the plant and somebody would go, she'd turn around and say, thank you. But when my husband came home from the service, he did not want me working. So I quit my job and I was home.
At war's end in 1945, Texas City switched gears and began looking forward to peacetime prosperity. Returning servicemen had little trouble finding work as stevedores and pipe fitters, chemists and surveyors.
I was discharged on a Thursday, and I went to work on Monday. Of course, it was for 80 cents an hour, and a job I didn't even know, but anyway, I had a job.
Chemicals were revolutionizing America's industry, and Texas City was at the forefront.
This is the age of industrial chemistry. It has attained importance undreamed of just a few years ago. All around us are the products of modern chemistry. Window shades, draperies.
Chemicals had done a lot to win World War II. Better living through chemistry was a big theme at the time.
In this new world of industrial chemistry, the horizon is unlimited. The industrial chemist, the pioneer of tomorrow.
By 1947, Texas City's future looked bright indeed. Its petrochemical plants were working around the clock. Its docks were handling about 4,000 ships a year. On April 11th, a French-owned cargo ship, the SS Grandcamp, entered the port of Texas City and docked at Pier O. There, longshoremen began loading her with 100-pound bags of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. It was bound for France, where the chemicals would help revitalize war-torn farmlands. Since the end of the war, about 75,000 tons of ammonium nitrate had passed through the Texas City docks. All the bags were labeled fertilizer. This told only part of the story. During the war, it had been mixed with TNT to make bombs. Longshoremen like Kiri Johnson worked with ammonium nitrate on a regular basis, but no one ever told them it could be hazardous.
I didn't know all that much about it. I thought it was just only a fertilizer, but you fertilize as a farmer. I didn't know it was no dangerous outfit. I didn't know nothing about it.
At 8 a.m. on April 16, 1947, longshoremen gathered as usual on Dock Road. Every morning, workers waited there for the foreman to choose which men would work on which ship for the day. As the men chosen to work on the Grandcamp descended into cargo hold 4, one of them smelled smoke. A quick search revealed the source, a small fire in the bags of fertilizer stacked in the hold. Fires like this were usually put out quickly. The men tried to douse the fire with jugs of drinking water. It didn't work. At about 8:20 a.m., the ship's whistle sounded an alert.
Then the crew brought a soda ash extinguisher in, and that didn't do any good. And then they lowered a hose into the number 4 hold with the intention of putting this on the fire.
But the ship's French captain halted their effort. He didn't want his valuable cargo damaged by the water.
His solution was to batten down the hatches, close all the ports, and turn on the steam smothering system in order to deprive the hold of oxygen and put out the fire that way.
But this only made the fire burn hotter. Along with the 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, the Grandcamp was loaded with 16 cases of small arms ammunition. It was the ammunition that began to worry many of the longshoremen. 10 minutes after the first alert, pressure created by the fire blew the hatch off hold 4. The brilliant orange smoke was so thick that the Grandcamp's captain was forced to give the order to abandon ship. Drawn by the smoke, a sailor brought his camera over and took these photos of the fire's early stages. Texas City's first alarm whistle sounded at 8:33 a.m. 27 members of the town's volunteer fire department quickly answered the call. Water sprayed from their hoses vaporized as soon as it hit the ship's superheated deck. Firefighters were no longer battling to save the ship, but to stop the flames from spreading to the docks. Meanwhile, hundreds of curious onlookers began to gather on the waterfront, drawn by the strange orange smoke. Some even brought their home movie cameras. At Texas City Central High School, senior Lucy Garcia was finding it hard to concentrate on her final bookkeeping exam. Her classroom was only a mile away from the burning Grandcamp.
It was just real beautiful orange fire coming out of there, like a big ball. We looked out the window, and all the football players were getting into cars. And we stood by the window, and the teacher let us. We said, "Oh, can't we go? Everybody's going to see that fire." And she said, "No, you'll have to finish your exam."
Jim Fuller was one of the students Lucy saw heading down to the docks.
It was attractive, and first thing I know, there are 8 of us jumping in that old car heading down there to check it out.
At the waterfront, rumors circulated through the crowd that there was ammunition on board which might explode. Onlookers kept what they considered to be a safe distance from the burning ship, about 1,000 feet. It would not be far enough. On the morning of April 16, 1947, as the French cargo ship SS Grandcamp burned out of control, hundreds of spectators gathered near the docks in Texas City, Texas. Workers from nearby industrial plants were also watching the fire. At the Monsanto chemical complex, just 600 feet from the burning ship, Assistant Plant Manager Robert Morris tried to figure out just what was going on.
We had no knowledge officially of what was on the ship. We concluded it was ammonium nitrate, and we talked about it and decided that based on our collective experience, it would not detonate, but it would burn.
Not everyone was so confident.
I have a strong intuition of things, and I felt uneasy. We couldn't hardly get started with work early that morning for some reason. And after a while, the girls all came down, and they wanted me to go walking with them to go see the fire. And I said, no, that fire frightens me. I don't want to go down there.
High school senior Jim Fuller was getting nervous about cutting class to watch the fire.
I decided I better get back to school because I had not ever played hooky, and I didn't want to get in trouble. So I chickened out and headed back. Well, in fact, we all did.
Back at Monsanto, Robert Morris wondered why the fire still wasn't under control. He jumped into a company jeep and headed toward the docks to find out for himself. By now, hundreds more Texas City residents were on the scene. Longshoremen like Kiri Johnson were ordered off the ships. Unhappy about missing a day's pay, the men hoped firefighters would put out the blaze quickly.
We figured if they come now and get the fire out, they might be able to go back to work.
Then, at 9:12 a.m., as almost 500 spectators looked on, the SS Grandcamp exploded.
I was watching the ship. I was driving south, and I was watching the ship over to my left a little bit when it blew. It was a hell of a blast.
The ship's cargo of a supposedly harmless chemical had detonated, taking everyone by surprise.
I saw the white and yellow and red streaks going up real high. At the top was little black stuff. Something just like picked up the house and shook it. Just shook it and then put it back down. I mean, it was quite a while. It was a long, about, I don't know how many minutes, but it was terrifying.
The explosion was heard over 100 miles away. Two small planes that had been circling 1,500 feet above were blown out of the sky, killing both pilots on impact. Robert Morris and his Jeep were hurled into the air by the force of the blast.
I put the brakes on, then I realized the Jeep was flying. So I carefully turned the key off, and I dove out the right side while we were still in the air. About this time, we hit a parked car.
Then, a 15-foot wall of water created by the blast crashed down onto the Texas City waterfront. Trapped under his Jeep, Morris was about to drown.
So I must have been under maybe 30, 45 seconds, something like that. I finally, literally lifted the Jeep off of me going out under the back axle.
Jim Fuller and his high school friends were walking back to their car when the blast knocked them down.
I never really heard the explosion. Next thing I knew, I was being blown along the ground. I don't remember falling, but I remember being abrased along the ground.
The nearby Monsanto complex was demolished. The explosion confirmed the suspicions of one of the company's senior chemists.
I thought, my God, it was a nitrate fire. Everyone's reaction was the same. Whether he was standing or sitting, you were instantly on the floor or on the ground from the tremendous earth shock that came from the detonation. And no one in their wildest imagination can imagine how terrible all this was.
Roofs caved in, covering Monsanto's employees with plaster and asbestos. Many, like Mary Hunter, were riddled with the glass from the windows.
My arm was really like hamburger. There was just nothing there. Evidently, I did this and was turned, thrown around. And so the glass went all into my back.
In that one instant, hundreds were killed, thousands wounded. Shocked to still be alive, high school student Jim Fuller started to run.
It's what you call scrambling. It's panic time. And so we made a mad dash, and that's when we saw some bad scenes. One car a piece of steel had come through and decapitated 2 of the occupants. It was just pandemonium, and everything was on fire that you can imagine. It was awful.
After crawling out from under his Jeep, Robert Morris's first thought was the safety of his workers.
I turned toward the plant, and all I could see was wreckage. Went into the office and started pulling people out of the wreckage. So I helped several other people, Mary Hunter being one of them. We helped her out.
Mary was battling to stay conscious when Morris found her.
I'd wake up and then I'd pass out again. And then the next time I woke up, and I don't know how long it was or anything, Robert Morris was carrying me out the front steps.
I carried her as long as I could, and I said, Mary, I can't carry any farther. We saw her car. She said, look at my car, and I said, Mary, look at my plant. And of course, it was burning pretty good by then.
Those in town who had survived the blast rushed to the scene to look for loved ones and to see if they could help. Along with most of the spectators, the 27 Texas City volunteer firefighters had been killed. Fires blazed all over town. The survivors had no way to combat the flames. For now, all they could do was to try to pull the living from the wreckage before it was too late. The explosion of the cargo ship SS Grandcamp on April 16, 1947, hurled Texas City, Texas, into chaos in a matter of seconds. The blast had ripped the ship apart. Red-hot pieces of steel were thrown nearly 2 miles away, igniting oil tanks and chemical plants, engulfing the waterfront in fire. Harmless cargo became dangerous projectiles.
There's big balls of twine. These things are thrown up like a rocket, they're on fire, and they're falling out into the bay.
A 150-foot barge called the Longhorn II was thrown out of the harbor and into a parking lot. Radio reports began going out at 9:44 a.m., just half an hour after the explosion. Some of the first broadcasts were pleas for help from the rescuers.
We want some ambulances and some doctors down here to help these boys. They're in bad shape, some of them. So send us some help down here and help us out a little bit.
Sightseers, stay at home and listen to the radio, and let the men that are down here do the work.
Fires raged everywhere, but with most of the town's firefighters dead and their equipment destroyed, Texas City had no way to stop the blazes. As flames danced over the city, men who had not so long ago been on the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific organized search parties to rescue survivors.
There were a lot of veterans. People knew how to take charge of things and how to obey orders and when to obey orders.
Newsreel crews also mobilized.
Relatives and friends besiege officials for word of missing loved ones as blast and flame continue to shatter the stunned town. Texas Governor Jester appeals for all possible aid, and General Jonathan Wainwright, hero of Bataan and commander of the 4th Army area, directs military rescue workers.
Worried about her family, Lucy Garcia, who had been in a high school bookkeeping exam, headed toward the burning waterfront.
I was passing all these people screaming, "Don't go there, don't go there." Because it was just like a war, that's what it was. You're just so flabbergasted, it's awesome to see all these people. And I said, my goodness, what has happened? Look at all these dead bodies.
As men searched through the rubble of what used to be the Texas City Terminal Railroad building, Joyce Couch lay pinned under a support beam in her office. She had been calling out for 3 hours, but no one had heard her.
I prayed to both the Lord and Blessed Mother and my act of contrition. Then I asked the Lord, if I can't get out, please let me die in peace and not lay here any longer. And at that time, I heard my dad call my name.
He helped pull her from the wreckage. She was badly wounded. Texas City didn't have a hospital, so Joyce faced a 10-mile trip to Galveston if she was going to survive. The makeshift aid stations that were being set up in Texas City were no match for the number of wounded pouring in. But help arrived quickly.
It was just amazing how fast people from doctors from Baytown, doctors from Houston, fire trucks, medications, bandages, the Red Cross was there.
By 10:30 a.m., less than 2 hours after the explosion, Galveston Red Cross workers had set up field stations. They needed thousands of bandages. Blood banks were running low. Water was hard to come by. Meanwhile, rescuers were digging through the ruins of building after building in hopes of finding survivors. The carnage left by the blast was shocking, even to war veterans.
We picked up pieces this morning of people, it's unbelievable. Legs, hands, feet, people burned to where they look like a piece of coal in Monsanto Chemical. They didn't have a chance to get out. We also found people underneath flat cars, which the bodies were blown away, and I guess the compact from the explosion blew them underneath the wheels, which had to be lifted with cranes and bulldozers to remove the bodies.
Later that same day, desperately needed supplies began to arrive from across the United States.
There's a new thing they just had for the Second World War called penicillin, and they used almost the nation's supply of penicillin in that time at Texas City.
Trained as a medic in the war, Roland Castanet rushed down to help at the clinic where his wife worked. To ease their pain, Roland gave the wounded shots of morphine. Many of those under his care were unrecognizable, even close friends.
I didn't recognize her because she was covered with oil and asbestos. She says, "Roland, don't you recognize me?" And it was Mary Hunter, who we had been going out with. We had been out with that Friday and Saturday night.
Because there was so much glass in Mary Hunter's body, doctors sent her to the Galveston hospital.
On the way over to Galveston then, I heard the young men in the car saying, well, she's going to lose that arm.
As the injured were being rushed away from the scene, firefighters from surrounding towns were speeding toward Texas City. But at 8 p.m., the terror of the day was cruelly intensified. The SS High Flyer, another freighter berthed at the docks, was on fire. Only a few were aware that, like the Grandcamp, it also carried a large cargo of ammonium nitrate, the same kind of fertilizer that had detonated that morning. Still, rumors that another explosion was imminent swept through the already exhausted and terrified community.
I was just scared. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to have another explosion. You know, we just had a good one.
Hundreds of Texas City residents lay dead, and thousands more were wounded by a horrific chemical explosion on the morning of April 16, 1947. The town had been decimated, and now another ship with the same dangerous cargo was blazing in the harbor. Its engines down for repairs, the SS High Flyer was dead in the water. The blast had sent her slamming into the Wilson B. Keene. Another freighter docked across the slip. Both ships were now hopelessly entangled. The High Flyer's potentially explosive cargo of nearly 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate made the ship a ticking time bomb. Robert Morris had carried the wounded out of the destroyed Monsanto plant until late that evening.
We didn't see nitrate smoke until 7, 8 o'clock that night. And it really wasn't much then, but it was enough to know that it was on fire. I gathered a few people who were still there. I said, let's get out of here. I said, the High Flyer's gonna blow at some point.
With all the chaos along the waterfront, not everyone was aware of the danger posed by the burning High Flyer.
Rescue people working down near the docks didn't pay much attention to the High Flyer, and it was not until about 8 o'clock that they took cognizance of the fact that the High Flyer was now on fire.
When they got this shocking news, officials had to act quickly. They called a shipping company in Galveston. There, several tugboat crews volunteered for a dangerous mission: tow the helpless High Flyer from the port before it exploded. They cast off for Texas City just after 10 p.m. When the volunteers arrived, they found conditions worse than they had imagined. Even approaching the High Flyer would be difficult. The ship was enveloped in dense smoke and noxious fumes, and the heat was so intense it could blister the skin. Despite the danger, crewmen from the tugs climbed aboard the High Flyer. They used acetylene torches to cut the anchor chain, hoping to free the entangled ship.
They tried to pull it just directly out by a couple of tugs in tandem and could move it only about 50 feet.
It was now 1 a.m., and balls of fire were shooting from the High Flyer's cargo holds. The tugs retreated. radio newsmen were reporting nearby.
This is Ben Kaplan, KTHD News Director. I've just left Mayor J.C. Tran at Texas City. He believes that federal authorities will make a complete investigation of the circumstances of the original explosion which set off the disaster. Here comes another explosion. The sky.
You have just heard it. We are bending down. The sky is like broad daylight. No one knows what it is from where we are. We have all hit the ground. We are all lying on the ground. It may have been another barge that went up. The sky is still red. We are all hitting the dirt. I hope you can hear me. This is Ben Kaplan, your KTHD News Director, with the entire KTHD News staff lying down. Folks are running in the street. Some metal landed within 10 feet of us. Here comes the man now. Have you come from the dock?
All I know, it was a ship that was being pulled away that they told us down there that was loaded with flour and it was not in any danger of it exploding. If it contained flour and lumber, well, I'll tell you one thing, flour and lumber certainly blows, and I'm not trying to be comic at a time like this either.
In reality, the explosion was fueled by ammonium nitrate.
I was watching the fires, and at a little after 1 o'clock, the high flyer blew. It was just like a big skyrocket. Went up maybe 3,000 feet, a big ball of fire.
For the second time in less than 24 hours, a tremendous blast had rocked the Texas coast. Blinded in the first explosion, Joyce Couch lay in the hospital 10 miles away in Galveston.
Oh yeah, I jarred my bed. Shook my bed, and man, that was the second blast, you know.
The explosion of the high flyer created even more destruction.
The inferno that almost blasted Texas City from the map rages unchecked and uncontrollable. 29 fuel tanks storing hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil turn the night into a weird recollection of bombing missions over Europe.
After surviving the Grandcamp explosion, Monsanto employee William Lane had gone back to his apartment in Galveston. Lane stayed up listening as radio coverage of the disaster went on through the night.
There is a few fire trucks and everything now going to work on the building where there is people trapped that can't get out and are probably dead by now. These terrific explosions have sent hundreds of people to their deaths.
I began to hear the names of friends that I lost. The reaction just set in the next morning. I couldn't shave. I couldn't hold a safety razor to my face to shave that morning. I was just that. I looked in the mirror and, gee, he just so lucky to be alive.
The survivors now face the search for missing loved ones. For many, that search would end among the more than 500 dead. The morning of April 17, 1947, found Texas City, Texas, in even worse shape than it had been the previous day. More than 550 people had been killed. The town had suffered 2 catastrophic explosions, creating devastation seldom seen outside of war. Because most people had evacuated the waterfront, the explosion of the high flyer claimed only 2 victims. But the destruction created by the second blast added to the horror. Most of the warehouses on the docks were now completely obliterated or were burning down. 1 out of every 3 homes in Texas City had been destroyed. volunteer firefighters from as far away as Houston had gathered to fight the blazes caused by the two explosions. In radio reports, rescue officials tried to sound upbeat.
We're going to stay here until things are well under control. We knocked the fire out to the just this side of the grain elevator, and the boys are now working on the docks. We're going to stay over here, and this thing is well under control. So you folks that have these boys over here that's fighting these fires, don't worry about them. They're all okay, and they're doing a bang-up job. We have to do a good job.
Coast Guard vessels attempted to put out the fires still raging on the docks. As the second day of the disaster wore on, shell-shocked survivors faced the grim task of collecting and identifying the dead. A temporary morgue was set up at an auto repair shop. When that was full, the dead were taken to the local high school.
They were put in the high school gym where I played basketball when I was in high school. And they were lined up in rows, covered neatly. Their personal effects were taken off of them, labeled for that body, and so forth.
A list of the identified dead was kept on a chalkboard. Searching the gymnasium was a last resort for desperate Texas City residents. Because many of the bodies were charred beyond recognition or had been blown to pieces, identification became extremely difficult. The Texas Department of Public Safety and forensic specialists from the FBI were called in. Many bodies had to be identified by fingerprints or by distinguishing marks, like tattoos. Teenager Jim Fuller recognized the body of one of his friends by a brand new wristwatch.
He showed me a new watch he was so proud of, and bless his heart, he didn't last a day. But that's the way I identified him. I knew that watch.
By now, the rest of the nation was following news of the tragedy.
Texas City lies broken and crushed under the terrible impact of the mighty concussions which piled up crumpled autos and made a shambles of freight trains and railroad yards. Her industry burned out, her homes and business centers shattered. Texas City survivors paused to mourn their dead.
On Saturday, April 19th, about 1,500 dazed and grieving people attended a service at the high school football stadium, while fires still burned in the distance. It wasn't until April 22nd, 6 days after the first explosion, that all of the fires were out. The last body was recovered on May 11th, 25 days after the explosion. The official death toll was now 568. But since many bodies were incomplete and could not be identified, the actual number will never be known. Survivors wanted to understand what had gone so horribly wrong. A Coast Guard investigation into the causes of the disaster concluded that the original fire was probably caused by a careless cigarette smoker. The fatal error came when the captain of the Grandcamp decided to protect his cargo from water damage and not put the fire out with a hose. The quick growth of Texas City's waterfront during the war may have added to the scope of the disaster.
You had pretty close proximity, say 1,000 feet in some cases only, between the docks, the petrochemical facilities, and at least some of the town. And when something powerful blows up, then there's going to be trouble.
Texas City had suffered the worst industrial disaster in the history of the United States. But its residents were determined to rebuild.
We just went on with our lives. We didn't know anything else. You go on.
Mary Hunter's arm that had been riddled with glass was saved, but she still lives with the memory of that day.
I still have glass. In fact, there's a piece in my head that I was having bad headaches years ago, and they took x-rays, and this glass showed up.
Shortly after the disaster, Monsanto Chemical Company announced that it would build a bigger and better plant on the site of the demolished one.
It was just as if everybody had had a shot in the arm, because they felt like they had something to cling to, that there would be a town, there would be at least one plant that they knew of.
Through hard work, the town began to re-emerge.
New homes, new industries, new businesses, new equipment for the city's protection. A new tomorrow which Texas City faces with confidence.
In 1997, 50 years after the explosions, Texas City residents held a celebration of rebirth. They still take pride in the way their town recovered from its tragedy. They have chosen the phoenix as the symbol for a town that has rebuilt itself from ashes. Individual battles still remain.
My face was split open. Everything was gouged out of my head and laying on my cheek. My eyelid was cut in 4 ways, and that glass had cut clean through here and was lodged. It was 2.5 inches long, 1 inch wide, 1/4 of an inch thick, and lodged at the base of the brain. And when they took me to surgery, they didn't know that was in there.
It took the efforts of 4 doctors to remove the glass. They called Joyce their miracle case.
You want to push it away. But actually, every day you look in the mirror, it's there.
Monsanto employee William Lane went back to work at the rebuilt plant and stayed there until his retirement.
With big thunderclaps for about 2 years, I'd nearly dive under a desk or something. You'd think, here it goes again. You just freeze and want to dive under something.
Their shared tragedy has brought the residents of Texas City a strong sense of community that, for the survivors, is equally intense more than half a century later.
We seem to be survivors.
I love Texas City, and I'm going to try to be here the rest of my life.
Town is better than it's ever been. It's cleaner than it's ever been. It's safer than it's ever been. We're just real proud of it.
Texas City has learned from its tragic past and become a model of industrial safety. Whether the chemical industry as a whole has learned the same lesson is not as certain.
One wonders whether we've really thought out very carefully the interactions among systems that produce chemicals and their interaction with population areas. We're getting better at it, but there may be still potential for another Texas City.